Now here's what we think makes the cut. More millennials in the U.S. are choosing to live with mom and dad. Pew Research defines millennials as 18 to 34-year-olds. The study found 26% live at home with their parents. That's up from 24% in 2010 and 22% in 2007 before the Great Recession hit. Data shows the share of young adults with jobs has begun to recover since then, but even still, fewer are living on their own. The study found 71% headed their own households in 2007. That's dropped to 69% in 2010 and fell even further this year to 67%. Pew suggests that's having a negative impact on the demand for housing and residential construction in the U.S. Home ownership has dropped to its lowest level since 1967. In the meeting, the team considered the cause of this failure to launch.
I don't buy this argument that sort of there's some new cultural thing where, like, kids don't want to leave home. And I think they're doing it because places that have disproportionate numbers of young people are like these cool affluent urban centers where people want to live, all of which happen to be places where rents and real estate cost more.
Well, my daughter is a millennial, and I find that what's interesting is that
Oh,
her
my
friends,
condolences.
exactly. But I find that a lot of my her friends are actually when they do stay at home, often it's to save money to do something else, and sort of the parents are complicit in this.
I think when you guys were young, it was more of a milestone to move out of the house, whereas now people in their 20s are really encouraged not to leap into that career so quickly and take that decade to travel and enjoy yourself. And we need our parents to do that.
The world's largest social network keeps getting bigger. Facebook now has nearly 1.5 billion users. That's up 13% from a year earlier. Mobile Facebook users jumped in the second quarter too, up 23% to 1.3 billion. And that's fueling mobile ad sales. Mobile advertising now accounts for more than 3/4 of the company's total ad revenue. But driving user growth is costing the company. It's poured money into improving its family of messaging and photo sharing apps. That took a 9% bite out of profit. Facebook stock closed down nearly 2% today. Even still, shares are up about 22% so far this year. In the meeting, the team questioned whether Facebook's user and ad growth is sustainable.
I think the market is still skeptical, right? It's a case of what have you done for me lately?
You're right, it does sort of feel like this sort of party where how much longer can this go on for? And every 3 months they're like, oh good, it's still going well, still going well.
To see a company grow its ad business so much,
right,
and then its users at the same time, when I know everyone complains about this surge in ads that are coming up on their newsfeed.
It is really interesting how they've been so successful with their mobile advertising though, because it wasn't long ago that we're still trying to figure out how to crack that, how to monetize off of such a small screen, and Facebook's figuring it out.
They're not necessarily figuring it out, it's that people really can't live without Facebook. So we are just going to roll through these ads whether we like it or not.
The general public doesn't trust banks, according to a group of international financial leaders. The Group of 30 is calling for cultural change to build that trust back. It suggests reforming how bankers are paid, firing people if necessary, taking new approaches to hiring, and having boards of directors take stronger roles to make sure the cultural and conduct changes are happening. A co-chair of the Group of 30 study and former vice chair of the U.S. Federal Reserve says the most ethical and responsible firms are that way not just because they follow a fixed set of guidelines and rules, but because of how their people actually behave. And that behavior is driven largely by values and culture. Meanwhile, J.D. Power found that Canadian banks may be losing touch with their customers. It says customer satisfaction has declined. It blames high fees and a reduced level of service at bank branches and on the phone. That could drive customers away. 9% of dissatisfied customers say they definitely will or probably will switch banks in the next year. That's up from 7% last year. In the meeting, the team questions what it would take to improve customer satisfaction with their banks.
They have a very, very profitable, well-run business right now, which makes it really hard to say, maybe we should stop doing this. To go to your shareholder and say, guys, great news, we had a great quarter, but we're going to do everything differently because there's a J.D. Power survey that said young people don't like banks.
And I'm a little tired of consumers complaining about bank fees. I have a chunk of cash that I keep in this institution. They allow me to invest here, here, here. I watch it appreciate, and yeah, I'm charged $1 here and there.
The dollar here and there, that's all?
Well, here and there.
What's your
everywhere,
secret?
What would it take for you to answer a survey to say that I'm very satisfied with my bank and I will stay?
I think for me, it's the transparency. Whatever one of the big five comes out and says, we're going to give you no ATM fees, period. That's going to be a real retention. Like, it's going to cost them.
In order to incentivize banks to make that change, maybe shareholder pressure to make the changes is what's needed.
And that's not going to happen.
Jim Miller is the Senior Director of J.D. Power's banking practice. So now, Jim, you've been doing this study for 10 years. I'm interested to know the results you saw this year. I mean, we're highlighting that people are not happy. What's changing, though? Is there anything that's particularly worse?
Well, what we've seen in the last year is that banks are increasing fees, particularly some of those regular fees, a maintenance fee or service charge to maintain your checking account. And then when they're going into the branch, they're experiencing longer lines, or they perceive that they're waiting longer to see a teller. When they call in on the phone, they're waiting longer to get through to a representative. So those are really hurting satisfaction this year.
Yeah. Now, I was curious, though, when I saw the sort of precise detail of the wait times, it's increased to 5.7 minutes from 3.8, your time to see a teller in the bank. People aren't standing in line timing this. This is just when they fill in your survey, they're just saying, this is my impression of how long I'm waiting?
Absolutely, it's perception. So part of that is the actual time that you wait. The other thing that comes into play is the better the experience, you have the perception that you're waiting less. So if you go up and you're not treated well, when you recall it, you think that you waited longer. When you go up and you see a teller, they're friendly, they use your name, they thank you for your business, you perceive that the experience was better, and therefore you think the wait time wasn't as long.
So they could invest in some charm school training for all the staff, presumably, and maybe boost that satisfaction rating.
That would certainly makes a difference. Always helps to be treated well, doesn't it?
But tell us a little bit more about your methodology. Obviously, wait times is something here, fees, or what else did you look at?
Right, so we go and we ask consumers about their entire banking experience. So we ask them about the products that they hold, how satisfied they are with them, with their interest rate, their fees. We talk about how they receive information from the bank, how clear it is, so how transparent the bank is in their fees, how easy it is to understand their products. We also go in and we talk about problems. So when you have a problem, how was that resolved? Was it resolved to your satisfaction? How much work was it to take to have that problem resolved? And then, of course, we talk about the ways that they interact with the bank. So we've talked about in the branch and in the call center, but we also ask about areas that are becoming increasingly important, such as online, their ATM experience, and their mobile experience.
Now, we gave that number of 9% of consumers are thinking of switching because they're really just not happy. And then you also heard us talking in the meeting that, what would motivate the banks to change anything, seeing as they're doing very, very well, thank you, in terms of their returns and their shareholders' happiness. But do you think there's a certain level of churn or unhappiness where the banks would say we need to do something different? What would that be?
I think until we see customers voting with their feet and looking for alternatives, the banks don't really have an incentive to change the way they do business. But this year, if you noticed in our study, in the mid-size category, Tangerine has the highest satisfaction. Now, they don't have the convenience of all of the branches, but they provide a really high level of service. They do it with very low or no fees in many cases, but you have to be willing to make the trade-off that I'm not going to have the opportunity to just go into the branch if I need to.
I wonder how much, you heard also one of our colleagues talking about she's actually not upset with the bank fees and so forth. How much do you think part of this could be just resentment on the part of consumers, because they do hear about the massive profits and then they do see their fee going up, maybe a small amount, but it just seems so wrong because they know how well the banks are doing.
Certainly when you see in the media that the bank announces record earnings and at the same time they're increasing their fees, that doesn't sit well with a number of customers. And the key to banks is to make sure that they're providing value so that if you have to pay the fees, as you say, you're not upset with those fees because you see the value that you're getting from the bank. So an example in the Big Five category, TD, they have a broad branch network. They're open a lot of hours. And so there's a lot of value in there for customers that are interested in going to the branch when they want to go to the branch. And that helps to diminish the negative impact of increased fees.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for having me today.